So we're just opening up TurningPoint right now, and once TurningPoint opens, we'll open up our intermediate user and advanced user presentation here. And like I said, guys, each one of these topics will be standalone. We're not going to need one to do the other. So the first thing that we're going to cover today is something called comparative links. Comparative links will allow you to go ahead and take a pre- and a post-analysis question within your presentation and link those together to see results on a subsequent third slide. So let's say right in the beginning of your presentation, you want to ask your students kind of a pre-analysis question. You want to do a knowledge check to see how much information they currently have about the topic that you're going to cover. So maybe right in the beginning of your presentation, you would put in a slide such as this. How familiar are you with TurningPoint? You would go through your entire presentation, and then at the very end of it, or towards the end, you would come to the question the second time. Well, this would be the pre and the post analysis right here. Through a comparative link, you're going to be able to see the difference of how those students answered it the first time compared to the second. Now, to set up a comparative link, you first of all need to build these question slides right into the presentation. So there's nothing special about these two slides. I just went to my Insert Slide tab, I clicked on Vertical, I typed out my question, and I typed out my answer choices. Now, do recognize that my slides are back to back. But if this was a practical scenario where I had students in front of me, I would have many slides in between these, both PowerPoint and TurningPoint. But for our training purposes, I do have these back to back. Now, after I have them in the presentation, to link them together, I'm going to come back up here to my Insert Slide tab, and when I click on Insert Slide, I'm going to locate Comparative Links, the second option from the bottom. When I select Comparative Links, a little menu that pops up, and it's just going to simply ask me for my first slide and my second slide. So in this case, our first slide is number 8, and our second slide is number 9. As soon as I press OK, it's going to build that subsequent third slide, which when I run this presentation, will show me the difference of how the audience answered the question the two separate times. So once again, comparative links will allow us to examine the difference between how the audience answered two separate questions. Now, these questions are going to be similar. I do want you to notice the question at the top of this link slide. How familiar are you with TurningPoint Part 2? It takes on how the question was stated the second time. So technically, you could link together two non-related slides, but that would be pointless. You wouldn't get any relevant information on here. So make sure that the questions are at least asking the same things, and that the answer choices are the same. Answer choices should be uniform, and the questions should pretty much be asking the same exact thing. Are there any questions, first of all, in terms of what we're trying to accomplish here in setting up these comparative links?
No, I'm good.
All right, thank you. So now we're going to go ahead and run these through on simulated data, and we'll also take a look at where the comparative link report is located. So as we're running through the presentation, this of course would be my pre-analysis question. Get the results as I normally would. Now keep in mind that I would normally go through a lot of other slides before I come to the question again, but this would be my post-analysis, shut down my polling, get my results, and now this time when I advance, I will advance to where I have the link slide to be able to see the difference of how the audience answered the two separate times. Okay, so the comparative links will show you that automatically when you arrive on this slide. Now keep in mind that this link slide needs to come after the second time you ask the question. Now you could move it later in the presentation and it's still going to work. Okay, but just make sure you do not move it before the second time you ask the question, otherwise this is going to become disabled because it has no information to link together. Now when your presentation is 100% complete, we all know that we should save our results to the save session, and then either immediately or at a later time we'll generate our reports. So when we get into our reporting screen, the very last folder, which reads Other Reports, will contain a comparative link report. So when I open this up, the comparative link report will be the second option down. So I'm going to check mark this box, click on Generate Reports, and now it's going to give me that segmented horizontal charts in an Excel format. So from here I can go ahead and print it off, email it, save it, do whatever I need to do, because of course it's nothing but Excel. So that's our comparative links, where we can go ahead and link together the pre- and post-analysis question. Before we move on to the next topic, are there any other questions on the comparative links?
No.
Now remember, each one of these topics are independent, so with this priority ranking, it's basically nothing to do with comparative links. Now just as my slide reads, priority ranking allows your participants to rank items based on importance. let's say you're running a presentation and you come upon a question and you want your students to go ahead and rank this question. You want them to go ahead and rank the answer choices based on some type of importance. So this would be the priority ranking. So they're answering a question multiple times, and each subsequent answer choice is worth a little bit less than their previous. Now the priority ranking slide is something you're actually going to build from scratch within the Insert Slide tab. So if I go to Insert Slide, come down to the fourth option from the bottom, this is where I'm going to find priority ranking. Now when I click on the priority ranking, I immediately have a menu that pops up which asks me how many responses I want to allow per participant. Now I can have up to 10. Well, I don't recommend that you go any higher than probably 4. 5 is even pushing it. Because when you run this live in a presentation and the students start ranking things, my experience is that the students are going to forget what they put for number 2 and number 3 by the time they get to number 4 and number 5. And so this can get kind of confusing if they're not having some way of tracking what they've already answered. So my recommendation is 3, exactly what the default is set to. So now that we're set to 3, we're going to press OK. This is going to build it right into the presentation. Now notice, this looks like any other question and answer slide. But this one's different because I went to priority ranking to put it in. In my case, the students will be able to answer this question 3 times. And each one of those answer choices will be worth a little bit less than their previous. Now I've already built a priority ranking slide in advance. My slide reads, choose your favorite vacation spot, pick your top 3 in order. Also, another very important thing that I want to note. It's important to go ahead and either verbally tell your students how this slide works in terms that the order does matter, and also you're allowed to pick more than one, or you're going to go ahead and put it in the text within the slide. My recommendation is you verbally tell them that, hey, you're going to pick 3, and it's not going to be a random selection. You're going to pick your most important first, and then your third important number 3. Important to let them know how this slide works, because otherwise you're going to get invalid information. Now what I'd like to do is go ahead and run this on the simulated mode. Take a look at the outcome. Okay, so of course when we arrive in this slide, the students are going to answer it 3 times. Now I do want you guys to recognize how in the upper right hand corner it reads 50 responses. That means there's 50 students in this simulated class. But when I shut down my polling and I change this over to whole numbers, Costa Maya seems to be the grand winner here with 90. And I have Jamaica with 20, Aruba 40, Barcelona 50. Paris has just got a horrible color right there, so who knows what that has. But obviously, though, you can see it's way more than 50. But keep in mind, though, this is going to take those different weights and add them together. So this is a perfect time to talk about how it's weighting these questions. The first response that a student would give is worth 10 points. The second response is worth 9. The third response was worth 8. And they're going to have all the way down to just 1 single point if I allow them to answer this question 10 times. Now, of course, we can see that all my numbers are in powers of 10. The only reason it's popping up like that is because I am on simulated data. But if I have a live audience in front of me, it might read something as 21, 43, 57, 65, so on and so forth. I'm probably not going to have all these whole numbers in powers of 10. So once again, the weighting is separated by 10, 9, 8 all the way down to 1, and it's just adding all those whole numbers together to give us the final results. Now these weights can be adjusted within your TurningPoint settings, which I will show you. But before we go into the settings to talk about adjusting those weights, are there any questions ahead of time in terms of just setting this up and facilitating this during the presentation?
No.
Okay. Now, of course, if we are going to go ahead and change the weights, these are something that we would need to do before we ever run the presentation. Okay, so once we have the priority ranking slide in there, if I come to Tools, down to Settings, you're going to notice on the left-hand side how it's listing every single one of my TurningPoint slides that are in the presentation. Now, slide number 13 was a priority ranking one, so I'm going to left-click on it, which will highlight it. And now using the menu on the right-hand side, I'm going to scroll down until I come to my third category, which is going to read priority ranking. Now remember, by default, the first response is worth 10 points, and the last response, if it's 10, is worth 1 point. But in my case, my students can only have 3 responses. But what if I wanted that second response to be worth only half as much as the first? Well, I can go ahead and click on the 9 and change it to 5. If I want that third response to be worth a little bit less than the second, then maybe I want to go ahead and put it at 2. Okay, so this is an opportunity where we can go ahead and adjust those weights So we do have a little bit more discrepancy between the first, second, and third response, because 10, 9, 8 is pretty close together, and you may not be getting the type of outcome that you may be desiring because they are so close together. But when you go ahead and you change the weights ahead of time, you're going to get a little bit more distance between these, which will give you greater discrepancy, so maybe you'll get the results that you possibly could be looking for there. Now, do keep in mind this is something you would do ahead of time. You would not do it after you run the slide as I showed you. Any questions in terms of adjusting these weights if you want to? Okay, so we're going to go ahead and move forward and talk about the competitions. Now, competitions can be set up and also facilitated with or without a participant list. So if you're using a participant list, the advantage of running competitions is that you can assign each one of your students ahead of time to a particular team. Now, if you're not going to be using a participant list, you can still run competitions, but you would need to do a couple extra things within your presentation to assign those teams. So I'm going to first of all talk about setting up competitions if you are using a participant list, and then I'm going to go ahead and discuss if you are not using a participant list. So if you're using a participant list and you want to go ahead and set up teams, well, if you didn't create the list, you can do it from scratch through the participant list wizard. And if you've already created the list, you can assign those teams by editing your participant list. I'll talk about putting in the teams from scratch and then editing them. So if I need to build a participant list from scratch, we should know that we're going to the participant list wizard, and we're going to go through a series of 5 steps. Step number 1 was that template. Step number 2 was our list fields. And step number 3, if you're in my new user class, you remember that I skipped this step because this is where we add groups that will assign teams for competitions and also groups for tracking demographical information. Well, we're going to get to the demographical information next topic, but for right now we want to assign teams ahead of time. So let's say I wanted a blue team, I added in there. I want a red team, and I also want a yellow team. So I have my 3 teams in there, and I can have as many as I want. But if you do notice, right below where I added those team names in, I have text which reads, check the groups that you wish to be included in a team competition. Well, I absolutely am interested in using blue, red, and yellow for teams. Therefore, I'm going to check mark all 3 of these boxes. Click Next, name the list, and then when you get to your final step where you add in the student information, you just simply check mark the box of the team you want that student to belong to. And we would do that for every single person in that list. Move down to the lower right-hand corner, click the Done tab, and now those teams are part of your participant list. Now, just because you've assigned teams within the participant list doesn't mean you ever have to run a competition. But if you ever do run a competition, well, you've already pre-assigned the teams, which makes the process pretty easy. Now, if you've already created a participant list, you're going to need to go ahead and edit the list to add the teams. So to edit a participant list, you're going to click on your Participants tab, and you're going to go to the 4th option, which reads Edit a Participant List. So when I click on this, I can go ahead and scroll over and find the list that I want to edit. So we'll open up this one right here, and you can see right now that there is currently no teams in this list, so I want to add them. To do this, I'm going to click my Edit button in the upper left-hand corner. And from the Edit, I get a drop-down, and I'm going to scroll to the only location that has an arrow, which is Add Field/Group. And from here, I'm going to go ahead and add a group. So we have the same little screen that we saw when we went through the participant list wizard. So from here, I can put in my blue team, my red, and also my yellow. And very, very important is that we check mark the boxes. Click Finish, and it's the same thing. Check mark the box that we want that individual to belong to. Any questions in terms of just assigning teams within the participant list? Now let's talk about actually building presentations in which we incorporate competitions. Now if you click on your Insert Slide tab, notice how there's lines within this Insert Slide drop-down. Horizontal lines is basically just separating categories. So from the Team Assignment slide down to the Wager slide, these are your competition slides. So we're going to go ahead and talk about these step by step. Now, I did mention that none of this is systematic, none of this is presented really logically because there is no step 1 and a final step. But in terms of creating presentations in which you incorporate competitions, you want to do it in the logical progression that I present. So first of all, if you're using a participant list, you assign those teams. And then you make the decision that you want to go ahead and incorporate a competition within a presentation. So if that's the case, and you're using a participant list, the first thing that we have in here is a team assignment slide. Think about the words here, team, assignment, slide. Well, we've already assigned our teams to each individual, so this is going to be completely unnecessary. We don't need a team assignment slide because those teams have already been pre-assigned within the list. So therefore, we're going to bypass this. Now, before we start putting in these different leaderboard slides, we have to go ahead and add our questions in. So we're going to go ahead and insert our questions, type out the questions, put in the answer choices, and very, very important is that we assign correct answers for these questions. Think about it. We're trying to run a competition. Well, how could we have a competition if there's no correct answers on any of these slides? Because if there's no correct answers, there's no points to be gained. So make sure that when you build your question slides, you are assigning correct answer choices because that's where the points are coming from for this competition. So the first step, put your question slides in there, set correct answers. After you do this, you're going to come back up to the Insert Slide tab, and you're just going to decide where and when within this presentation you want to show your students both the team scores as well as their individual scores. So you can have a team and an individual competition within the same presentation. You're just going to add scoreboard slides. So if I insert this team leaderboard slide, notice how it's just another slide that gets built into this presentation. Now when I run this presentation live, it's going to go ahead and automatically generate the current team score at this time in the presentation. I don't have to customize this slide because where it reads team 1 through 5, it's going to go ahead and automatically take on the team names that I've assigned from within the list. And over there on the left-hand side, it will also automatically generate that current team score at that time in the presentation. Now I do want to take just a moment to talk about how these team scores are generated. So let's say I put this team scoreboard slide after my first question. The first question I asked in the presentation, and that question was worth 10 points. And let's say I have two teams, a blue team and a red team. The blue team has 20 people on it, and the red team has 10 people on it. So it seems like we have a pretty large difference between the two teams. Now, if the question is worth 5 points, in order for the blue team, who has 20 people on it, to get all 5 points, all 20 people on the team need to get the question correct. For the red team, who only has 10 people on it, in order for them to get all 5 points, all 10 people must get the question correct. So it's just taking a percentage of how many people on the team got the question correct to actually assign the points. That's how these team scores are generated. So technically, the team with the least amount of people would actually have the biggest advantage, because there's always a maximum amount of points that can be gained from a particular question. How are we doing so far, guys? Any questions in terms of assigning teams, putting the correct answers on the questions, or inserting these team scoreboard slides? Now, do keep in mind the team scoreboard slide is going to be inserted as many times as you want. So if you want to show the updated team score after every single question slide, then you're just going to make sure that you insert this ahead of time after every single question slide. If you just want to put it in one time at the very end of the presentation, well, that's exactly what you do. Now, another option that we have here is a participant leaderboard. Participant leaderboard works the same exact way as the team leaderboard in terms of automatically generating the updated score. In this case, it's going to be the updated participant score. So since in this environment we're going to be using a participant list where it says participant 1 through 5, it's going to actually give us that participant's name. So it will show us their name right here. And it will show us their updated points at that time in the presentation. Nothing needs to be done from you as the presenter for anything to generate here. It will automatically generate when this comes up in the presentation. So this is your participant scoreboard, just like the team scoreboard. Build this in as often as it is you want to show those participants the updated score at that time. Any questions on the participant scoreboard? Another option that we have here is a team MVP slide. This, of course, is an additional option. Team MVP slide is something that probably should go at the end of your presentation, although it doesn't necessarily need to be. But every team has a most valuable player, whether that team came in first place or last place. Down below there, it's going to show you who the person was where it says participants. It'll show you what team they were from and also the points that were generated. Now, of course, since we're going to be using a participant list, it will give you their name where it says participants. And absolutely nothing is done by you as a presenter to generate anything here. Software automatically does it. The next option is the fastest responder slide. Now, the fastest responder slide is not a scoreboard, but what this will show us is from the previous Turning Point question asked, who got the question correct, and also who got the question correct in the fastest amount of time. So if it's myself and, let's say, Shirley, we're in the competition, and Shirley chimes in from the previous question in 2.57 seconds, and she was correct, but I chimed in 3.10 seconds, but I'm incorrect. Since I'm an incorrect responder, even though I'm faster, my name is going to be nowhere to be found on this fastest responder slide. Shirley was the fastest, and she was also correct. So her name is going to be on the slide, and just to the left will be 5 points, whatever was it I said, but it will always be to the 100th place. So if it was 5.27, it's going to be 5.27 to the left. Questions at all on Team MVP or the fastest responder?
Nope.
All right, guys, so what I'm going to do is go ahead. Actually, excuse me, I got one more within here I want to show you, and that is the wager slide. Now, the wager slide, just as it reads, allows your individuals to go ahead and wager or do a little bit of gambling their total current points on the very next question. So this is for individual points. So basically, if I'm sitting with 100 points, I wager 25% of those, and I get the question wrong, I'm down to 75 points. Okay, so the wager slide is always going to apply to the very next Turning Point question. Now, in terms of best practices, it's a good idea to put an individual scoreboard slide in right before this one so everybody can see how many points they currently have. Then show this slide, bring up the question, and then it's not a bad idea after the question to put in another individual scoreboard so everyone can see how many points they gained and or lost. Questions at all on the wager slide? All right, now I do want to go ahead and recap setting up competitions if you're using a participant list, and then we're going to jump over if you're not using a list. So if you're using a participant list, make sure when you get to that group step that you are making sure that you check mark those boxes. Can't emphasize that enough, because if you're not check marking the boxes, you're not using those groups for competitions. You're actually using those to track demographic information. After you do this, when you're building your presentation, you're just going to make sure that you have question slides in there and you set correct answer choices. This is very, very important that you set the correct answer choices, because if you don't, then there's no points to be gained. Now afterwards, we're going to come up here to the Insert Slide tab, and we're just going to decide where and when within the presentation we want to show those students both the team score and the individual score, and we're going to build these scoreboard slides in whenever we want to. It's up to us. Okay, if we want to show it after every single slide, we do that, or just one time to show a final score, it's up to you. Remember, the team assignment slide is not going to be necessary because you've already inserted the teams ahead of time. Team MVP slide is something that will show you the most valuable player from every single team. Fastest responder, not a scoreboard, but it will show us who is the fastest responder to the previous Turning Point question. And then the wager slide is something that will allow individuals to wager a certain percentage of their individual points on the next question. And yes, I am bypassing the racing leaderboards. They are not actually a game. All they are is just leaderboard slides that show balloons levitating across the screen, as well as horses kind of levitating as well. And yeah, I guess unless you're working with maybe second graders, it's probably not going to be too impressive to really anybody. That's why I normally don't show it in a training class, but it is there as an option. But basically, it's not a race. All it is a scoreboard. All right, so now I want to go ahead and change gears and talk about if you're not going to be using a participant list. So if you're not going to be using your participant list and you still want to run both team and individual competitions, when you're building your presentation, even before you start building in your question slides, one of the first things you want in that presentation is this team assignment slide. The team assignment slide will allow each student in your class to choose a team to be on for the remainder of the presentation. So let's say that Deb and I both picked we're on Team 2. We're going to be on Team 2 for the remainder of this presentation because we both hit button number 2. Now this slide can be completely customized. So it doesn't have to say please select the team, and you can also have up to 10 teams. But all the things on here are customized. We can represent the team names with whatever it is we want to. But remember, however the students answer this question is what team they're going to be placed on for the remainder of the presentation. Everything else is the same. Build in your question slides, set correct answers, put in your scoreboard slides, team MVP, fastest responder, the whole deal. But think about this. If I come to this participant scoreboard slide, If I'm using a participant list, it's going to show me the student's name. But in this case, I'm not using a participant list. But it can still identify who a student is via the device ID found on the back of the response card. Now, I've been in many situations where I've given live presentations and run competitions, and barely ever do I actually use a participant list. It is no problem for people to turn over to the back of their card, find a device ID, and match it up with what they see on the screen. It's usually very seamless, and it still adds to that engagement interactivity, and people still have a blast with it. That's going to be the same thing also for the team MVP slide, where it says participant. It's going to be represented with the device ID, and also for the fastest responder, once again, it will be device ID. So the big difference between running a competition with and without a participant list is if we're not using a participant list, we're going to put in the team assignment slide, and when we come to these individual scoreboards, it's going to show us device ID instead of the student's name. Are there any questions at all in terms of running competitions?
No. No, I don't think so.
Okay. Let's go ahead and keep it moving then. We're going to move along to the next topic, which is demographics. Now, demographics is a way in which we can track our audience into individual groups. So think about when you're teaching. Think about the different ways you may want to track your students. That is demographics. I don't care if you want to track them by the color shoes they're wearing. In our case, that is demographics. Now, I've seen other teachers track it by who's free and reduced lunch and who's not, male, female, all kinds of different things. That's demographics. Now, just like running a team competition, setting up demographics is also going to depend on whether or not you're using a participant list. So if I am using a participant list, I can pre-assign each student to a demographic group ahead of time. If I'm not going to be using a participant list, then I need the students to let me know what demographic group they belong to, and they're going to do that by answering a demographic question. So let's first talk about if you're using a participant list. So either if you created it or haven't created it yet, will depend on what we do here. So if you need to create a participant list from scratch, once again, we're going through the list wizard. And just like with competitions, we're going to stop at step number 3. So if we stop at step number 3, remember, this is where we put in the teams for the competitions. But this is also where we assign groups for the demographics. So from here, let's say that I wanted to separate my class. Let's say I'm teaching high school. And I have freshmen in there, and I also have sophomores. So I have my two groups. Now remember, I have text down here which reads, check the groups that you wish to be included in the team competition. Well, guess what? I'm never interested in seeing freshman and sophomore ever appear in a scoreboard slide. Therefore, I never ever want to check mark these boxes. I'm going to keep these unchecked, which informs the software that I'm only using freshmen and sophomores to track demographical information. Now, I could also come in here and put in my team names too. If I want a blue team, a red team, and a green team, I can put those in, and of course I'm going to check mark these boxes. So now the software knows that freshmen and sophomore are being used for demographic groups, and blue, red, and green are being used for team competitions. It's the same thing when we get to the final step. So my first student, maybe they're a freshman, and if I ever run a competition, perhaps they're on the blue team. So I'm going to check mark those boxes. Press done, and now the information is going to be saved. Any questions in terms of assigning demographics within the participant list?
No.
Also keep this in mind, if you've already created your participant list and you need to edit it, go ahead and select the list that you want to edit. Click the Edit tab, and just like with the teams, we're going to add field/groups, and we are going to add a group. Okay, so if I wanted my freshmen, and my sophomores, I'm not going to check mark the boxes. I'm going to click Finish, and there's my two groups right here. Same thing. Do not check mark the boxes. Now, the big advantage of using a participant list and tracking demographics from within it is that technically the students never have to know that they're being tracked in those different groups. But the great thing about tracking demographics, and the whole point of it, is when your presentations are done, you can go ahead and generate demographic reports. The demographic reports will show you how your different groups answered every single question in the presentation. Now, obviously, I'm not using a participant list right now. And so since I'm not using a participant list, I need to go ahead and insert what's called a demographic question. I need to let the students tell me which group they belong to. Now to insert a demographic question, I'm going to go to my Insert Slide tab, and notice how I'm just clicking on a vertical slide. There's nothing demographic about this yet. Make sure that I go ahead and type out the question in the format I want to group them by. Always good to learn how to type before you ever attempt to do any of this, though. Okay, so there's my two groups. Now, of course, there's nothing demographic about this question. Nothing at all is demographic. So I need to let the software know that I'm using this question to track my audience into these groups. Now, do I have anybody in my class today who's going to be using Office 2003?
No.
Okay, so everybody's at least on Office 2007. So if you're at least on Office 2007, you're going to have this menu pane to the right-hand side. At the very top of the menu pane, you have Session Options. The icon directly to the left below it, when you bring your cursor over top of it, will read Set Slide as a Demographic. So I'm just going to click that one time. Now that I click this icon one time, I've designated to the software that I'm using this question to track demographics. This is very important. This is how I make a slide on demographic. Now, the whole point of it, like I said, is we're going to be able to generate reports to see how the freshmen and sophomores answered every single question. So give me an opportunity here to run this on simulated data, to separate my groups, and then I'll show you where these demographic reports are located. Okay, so the presentation is done. Remember, when the presentation is done, save the results through Save Session. And now we're going to come over here to Reports. Now, when we're in the report screen, since we did set at least one slide as a demographic, and/or we set up demographics within our participant list, I have the option of generating one or both of these demographic reports. One is awesome, one is just okay. This one's good, graphical comparison. So I'm going to go ahead and generate this one. So I'm just going to go down there, click Generate Reports, and now I'm going to be able to see how my freshmen and sophomores have answered every single question in this presentation. So here we are. How familiar are you with Turning Point Part 1? I can see how the freshmen answered it, and I can also see how the sophomores answered it. Keep this in mind. This first question, how familiar are you with Turning Point? I asked this in the beginning of my presentation. The demographic question was actually the last one, but it doesn't matter. The software is still able to break down those groups according to how they answered previous questions. It's still able to track that information because they're still going to be using the same response card. So the software knows how those individuals answered every single question. And I'm going to be able to see this for the entire presentation, every single question that has been asked. So these are your demographic reports right here. Remember, in order to generate these demographic reports, you must either set up demographics within your participant list, and when you use that participant list with any presentation, you can generate a demographic report, or set a slide up in your presentation as a demographic by clicking on the Session Options, Mark Slide as a Demographic Slide. Are there any questions at all on what's required to generate a demographic report?
No.
Okay. Now, I do want to go ahead and show one more thing in terms of tracking demographical information, and this is something you can do during your presentation to show the outcome of one demographic question linked to a regular Turning Point question to show them the final outcome. So what I want to do is go ahead and just reset this session because I'm going to ask this question again, what grade are you in? So what we're going to do is link a Turning Point demographic question to a regular Turning Point question, just a normal chart slide that I would put in. Okay, so here's my demographic question, what grade are you in? And let me put in a slide right next to it, and maybe I'll put in, what is your favorite subject? All right, now there's absolutely nothing demographic about it because I don't want it to be a tracking question. But I do want to go ahead and link my demographic to this one. Now to do this, I'm going to come up here to my Insert Slide tab. And from Insert Slide, I'm going to go down to the third option from the bottom, which is Demographic Comparison. When I click on this, it's simply going to ask me for my demographic slide. So in this case, my demographic is number 24. And the slide that I want to go ahead and link it to is number 25. Now, it doesn't necessarily need to be back-to-back like mine, but as soon as you press OK, it's going to go ahead and build in the chart slide right after. Now, you might be looking at this whole process and even at the chart slide and think to yourself, this looks strangely similar to what he showed right in the beginning of the presentation, which was comparative links. Yes, it looks the same, and you actually kind of set it up the same way. You're linking together two slides. But remember, the comparative links link together a pre- and post-analysis question. Both those questions were the same, and it showed the final outcome. This, we're linking together a demographic question to a regular question to show us the final outcome. Now, do notice at the bottom here we have our legend, which represents our demographic groups, and the question that we linked it to is located up on top. So you're going to go ahead and link together two slides if you want to show the students the outcome during the presentation. So if they want to see it during the presentation, this is something that we can show. So the demographic question was just asked. This is the slide that we linked it to. And of course, this is the final outcome right here. So I can see a breakdown of how the freshmen and sophomores have answered this question. Any questions at all in terms of setting up this demographic comparison slide?
No.
All right. Now, guys, I'm going to go ahead and change gears a little bit in terms of the last topic that we covered. And I'm going to talk about the TurningPoint show bar. The TurningPoint show bar is what appears in the upper right-hand corner on the slide when you arrive on one of those TurningPoint slides. So what I'm going to do right now is get back into presentation mode. So when I'm in presentation mode, you can see that I have all of these icons that are located up here in the upper right-hand corner. And some of them I can access when polling is open, some when it's closed, some of them either or. And I'm going to work from left to right to show you each one of these icons. Going left to right, the first one that I have here is hide/show the TurningPoint show bar. So if I either hit the F9 or left click of the mouse, it makes that show bar disappear. And then the F9 key will make it reappear. So if that show bar is blocking out perhaps your question, now we can go ahead and bring the question to the forefront by making that thing disappear. The icon right next to it is toggle between percents and counts. So right now my charts are being displayed as whole numbers. If I want to see it as percentages, if I click that, it changes it over. Or the default is percentages, so when you guys click on it, it's going to change it over to the whole numbers. Third icon that we have is something called data slicing. Now the data slicing is a fantastic tool to be able to break down the current question that's on the screen by how our students have answered previous questions. Let me show you what I mean. So if I click on data slicing, notice that it's showing every single question I've asked in the presentation. Now since I reset, I only have 2 questions in here. Otherwise, I would have every single one of them. But I can basically open up question data, select a certain answer choice, and then when I come down and click the Select tab, the chart now being displayed is sliced by how all the sophomores answered it. It's only showing one group. So for the sophomores, 8 for math, 8 for science, 7 for history. But if I click on this again, and this time I select freshmen, click the Select tab, now this chart is being represented how all the freshmen answered it. Now even though I'm breaking this down by how my students answered that demographic question, which was, what grade are you in? This will slice it by any question data. So you don't necessarily have to ask a demographic during the presentation to use data slicing. I might have had something earlier in there that asked, how was your day? And I can go ahead and say, everyone who's having a bad day, what is their favorite subject? This is something that I can access at any time during the presentation when polling is shut down. This is data slicing. How are we doing so far? Any questions on any of these icons yet?
Yeah.
All right, now the icon right next to it reads Show Original Chart. It's just going to bring up the original way the students answered the question. Probably the most popular option on here is the one that I really want you to know about, and this is the Repoll the Current Question. So let's say you accidentally shut down polling a little bit too soon during your presentation, and you need to open it up a second time. Well, if you click on this Repoll icon, polling now opens up, and at this time the students can go ahead and resubmit their response. Once we get all those student responses, we're going to shut down the polling and, of course, get completely different results. Now, it's important to note that when you repoll, this is actually treating it as a completely separate question. So if I'm a student in this class, even though I might have answered it the first time, I'm still going to need to resubmit my response. Because when I generate the reports, I'm going to be able to see the outcome of this question listed 2 separate times. So repolling the current question, we'll treat it as a completely separate question. Now, it doesn't create a completely separate slide. It's still just one slide. But when you generate the reports, you're going to see the outcome of the 2 questions that were asked. The next 2 icons, I need to open up polling to show you. And the first one is a response grid, and the other one is a non-response grid. Now, if you were using a participant list and you clicked on this, I am not. It says anonymous. But if I had a list, I'd have a similar box down here, and I'd have each student being represented in their own little box. Now, it's going to be a little bit larger than this to show each student. But as each student answers the question, the box correlating with their name is going to light up. This is going to be your visual indicator that student has indeed answered the question. So only the students who have not yet answered will have boxes that are not yet lit up. And the icon right next to it is Show Non-Response Grid. Show Non-Response Grid will do just the opposite. It's going to start out with all the students in there, and as the students answer the question, their name will disappear, so only the students who have not yet answered will still remain in that box. And I got 2 more on here I actually want to show you. The first one is Display Participant Monitor. I'm going to shut down polling to show you this. Let's say that I want to know in real time. I want to know right now how each student is answering every question. I want to know how Johnny in the back's doing, because he's been struggling, he's getting D's and F's, and we need to bring his grade up. So if I click on Display Participant Monitor, if I was using a participant list where it says first name and last name, I'm going to see each student's name. And as I click on their name, I can see their overall percentage correct, their total points, and even their average response time. So if Johnny has taken 20 seconds to answer every question compared to everyone else taking only 5, we may have problems. And when I click on the student's name down below, I can see every question and how they answered every question. Okay, so this is the participant monitor. So this will allow you to see how each student is performing in real time without having to wait to generate those reports. Now the final thing on here I want to show you for today is the icon right next to it, which reads Insert an On-the-Fly Slide. So this is actually probably the second most popular option in here besides repoll. So let's say that depending on how your students are answering questions, you want to be able to build your presentation as you go. So when polling closes down, you can go ahead and click this custom question box, and you can build a slide right in the middle of the presentation. So maybe you want to ask something as groundbreaking as how was your day? You'd list the questions up on top, answer choices below. Do notice how I'm not numbering or lettering these answer choices. As soon as I click Inserts, polling now opens up on this newly created question. Students would respond, get the results, and basically I've just built a brand new slide that will always be part of this presentation now. So once again, we had the hide/show, the show bar, makes it disappear and reappear. Toggle between percents and counts, go between percentages and whole numbers. Data slicing allows us to slice the current slide by how the audience members answered any previous questions. Show original chart brings up the original way in which this question was answered. Repoll the current question will allow you to do just that, repoll a second time. Response grid and non-response grid, when you are using a participant list, you can see who has answered the question and who has not yet answered it. Display participant monitor allows you to see currently in real time how the students are doing. So who's doing well and who's not doing so well. And then finally we talked about an insert and on-the-fly slide. This allows you to go ahead and build your presentations as you run through the live presentation. Any questions on any of those icons up there on the Turning Point ribbon that we have covered? All right, everyone. Well, I'll tell you what. Since we do have an intermediate and advanced class, to give you a little bit of background on how we used to do things. We used to have only 2 classes. We had a new user and also an advanced user. And we used to kind of squeeze everything from the advanced and the intermediate into one session, and it was just a bit of an overload. So we separated into 2 classes, and that's why this one doesn't take the entire hour. But I think if we went any further, it might be a bit of a cognitive overload, so we're going to go ahead and stop at this time. Okay, so we covered quite a few topics there, the comparative links, priority ranking, competitions, demographics, as well as the Turning Point show bar. Now before I escape into this sharing mode and upload that training document for you guys, have any additional questions for me?
Not at this time.
All right, very good.